This is Euronews Now. Here are your top stories. President Zelensky says Russian forces have completely destroyed the eastern region of Donbass and describes the situation there as hell. The US accuses Russia of using food as a weapon of war in Ukraine and says that the blockade of southern ports is holding global supplies hostage.
Hundreds of extremist audio clips have been removed from the music platform SoundCloud after a Europe-wide police operation.
And star power in Cannes as Anne Hathaway and Anthony Hopkins take to the red carpet. We'll be bringing you all the latest from week one of the film festival. I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. President Zelensky says that conditions in Ukraine's Donbass are hell as Russian forces intensify their attacks in the region. In his latest nightly address, Ukraine's leader said that the eastern region had been completely destroyed, accusing Moscow of indiscriminate shelling. Well, Russia claims to have gained almost full control of Luhansk after heavy attacks on cities in Ukraine's east. Ukrainian officials say that Russia has stepped up its assault in Severodonetsk, where currently 15,000 people are holed up in bomb shelters. President Zelensky says that the scale of destruction makes no military sense. Our international correspondent Annalise Borges is in the southern city of Mykolaiv, and she explained why Donbass is so important for both Russia and Ukraine.
The Donbass has been the focus of a war that started some 8 years ago, back in 2014. Russian-backed separatists then continue fighting over control of the area, captured large swathes of territory, self-declare the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. And from that point until earlier this year, the start of the year, more than 14,000 people had been killed. Since then, it has been a flagship, a flat point of this war, since Russia said that its military operation here in Ukraine would shift the focus to the Donbass. And for Ukrainian troops is also a very, very important point. They say they are not only going to be working towards recapturing territories such as Kherson, but also the Donbass and even the Crimean Peninsula annexed by Russia back in 2014.
Let me ask you this, Annalise. What next then for Donbass when, in President Zelensky's words, large parts of it have essentially been decimated by the Russian military? What does Russia intend for this region?
Well, Russian installed authorities have been asking Moscow to annex those parts of Ukraine. And we've heard, of course, about that visit by the Russian deputy prime minister who came to Kherson region, stating that the region had great prospects. Earlier, Moscow had said that Russia would be present there forever. We have managed to speak to people inside these occupied territories, most significantly inside Mariupol, and they described to us a very different city beyond the widespread level of destruction. They also talked about road signs and all kinds of advertising switched from the Ukrainian language to Russian. They also say they are being ordered to re-register their property if they don't want to face eviction from their homes. And those who wish to leave Mariupol right now, for example, are being ordered to go through a filtration camp, and that is for everyone, including women under the age of 60 and all men.
Now, Russian state media is reporting that President Putin has been informed of the, quote, complete liberation of the port city of Mariupol and the Azovstal steel plant that Ukrainian troops have been defending for more than 2 months. Well, earlier this week, a first wave of fighters surrendered to Russian forces. The Kremlin now says that almost 2,500 troops have laid down their arms. More than 900 of those captured soldiers are believed to have been imprisoned. Well, the fate of others hangs in the balance as Moscow deliberates the potential of future prisoner exchanges. In a video message on Friday, the Ukrainian commander of the Azovstal Defense Forces said they'd been told to give up the fight for the city.
Day 86 of the defence of Mariupol. The higher military leadership have given an order to save lives and preserve the well-being of the servicemen of the garrison and cease defending the city. Despite heavy fighting, defending while being encircled, and lack of resupplying, we kept reiterating the three conditions most important to us, namely civilians, wounded, and those who have been killed in action.
A Ukrainian medic who recorded remarkable footage of injured soldiers and civilians in Mariupol has reportedly been captured by Russian forces. Friends of Yulia Pavieska, who is also known as Tyra, are praying for her safe return after her convoy was intercepted by troops in March. Mark Armstrong now reports.
A well-known Ukrainian medic who recorded her time in Mariupol on a small data card and managed to smuggle it out in a tampon has been captured by Russians. Yulia Pavieska is known in Ukraine as Tyra, a gaming nickname. She wore a body camera and recorded her team's frantic efforts over 2 weeks to bring people back from the brink of death in the besieged city.
I believe she will return. We will do our best. Each of us will do everything to make sure they come back whole. She and her driver, who were captured together.
Tyra gave her footage to the Associated Press and was captured by Russian soldiers along with her driver the next day, March the 16th. Moscow has portrayed her as working for the nationalist Azov battalion, in line with the Kremlin's narrative that it's attempting to denazify Ukraine.
I cannot say that she is some kind of radical or Nazi. She, like a real medic, is apolitical and helps everyone who needs it.
Tyra is now a prisoner of the Russians, like hundreds of soldiers and civilians who've been kidnapped or captured. The UN monitoring mission say some may have been tortured and 5 were later found dead.
Before the war, Ukraine played a vital role in global food markets, and the recent fighting has seen a major disruption to the supply chain. This week, the UN warned it could lead to years of mass hunger and famine, especially in parts of Africa and the Middle East. Now, world leaders are hoping to persuade Belarus to help address the problem, as Catherine Berjikian reports.
The US and UN are trying to negotiate a deal to transport grain from Ukraine through Belarus to a Lithuanian port to help world markets facing food shortages. As well as by rail, the UN Secretary General will meet with Russian, Turkish, and Ukrainian officials to organize a shipping lane. As an incentive, US officials have told the Wall Street Journal that they are exploring a 6-month waiver of sanctions affecting Belarus's fertilizer industry. However, there are concerns about removing sanctions on President Alexander Lukashenko's regime. Washington's original measures were in response to the country using migrants to put pressure on the EU and its crackdown on its domestic opposition.
Our plan now is to exhaust regime as much as possible with derecognition, with political and economical isolation, and on the other side to support Belarusian people, media, civil society, organizations and initiatives that are fighting with the regime. So our aim is to make Lukashenko stop violence in our country, release all political prisoners, and start dialogue with Belarusian people, not with Western countries.
Despite these plans, some have argued that transporting the much-needed sunflower oil and grain by rail will only bring exports up to 10% of their pre-war levels.
The US says that Russia is using food as a weapon at a moment of already unprecedented global hunger. Jordan Cox is the spokesperson for the World Food Programme in Rome, and he says that the global food supply chain is currently facing a perfect storm.
If you look at the numbers before Ukraine, what we call acute food insecurity, so people who are essentially marching towards starvation, those numbers were already at about 276 million people around the world, caused by climate change, COVID, spiraling costs, man-made conflicts. Add on Ukraine, and we're looking at a potential 47 million additional people affected by those ripple effects from the Ukraine crisis that could be marching towards starvation as a result. So it is very serious, and it's a very big global food crisis that we need to address now.
I mean, that risk of starvation, as you say, is very great. It's bad enough as it is, but I want to ask about the potential compound effects of that as well. Could we see resulting from this things such as social unrest, protests, for example, as well as migration?
Well, take a look at the previous crises, food price crises, let's say 2008 or 2011. Those had very serious social, political consequences, destabilization in lots of places around the world. The world was a very different place in 2008. You had no war in Syria, no war in Yemen, no war in Ethiopia, you had no COVID. Climate change was talked about at that time as a future thing that would come and cause problems for us all. Well, it's 2022, it's here now. So the context that the world is in at the moment is radically different and a lot less stable than it was in 2008. So to put a global food crisis of this potential magnitude, I mean, these are numbers we have never seen before globally. To put that on the world at this time could result in much worse consequences than we saw back then. So we need to do everything we can to hold that off now.
How do we do that? How can this situation be averted? And I'm talking about in the case of, say, for example, it's not possible to convince Russia to stop its blockade of southern ports. What happens then?
Well, the UN Secretary General, as you mentioned in the previous segment, is working with the political actors to see if that will be possible. I don't know exactly what will happen if that isn't, but I can give you a broader picture of what would happen globally in terms of the world. We're going to see, that 47 million number that I mentioned of people marching towards starvation that are on top of the 276 million already. That's a prediction based hopefully on the idea that eventually the war will end. If we have massive disruption to grain supplies, I mean, people find other sources. We purchase other sources on the market and stuff. But the issue is people are already facing some of the highest food prices in history right now. We know where that leads. And we know what the solution is. It's a relatively simple solution. It's not particularly easy to do. So the conflict needs to end so that we can open up those ports, so that Ukrainian grain and from the breadbasket of the world can get flowing again. The pressure on the markets needs to come down. People need to be able to afford food. We don't want to have a food availability problem next year, which is the kind of thing that we could be looking at if this continues to worsen in the current context. And finally, we're calling on the governments around the world and individuals to fund the shortfalls to humanitarian organizations like the UN World Food Program. We're preventing famine. We've done it in the past. We're fighting hunger. So we have shortfalls like we've never seen before, and we need the funding for that.